Hey there, Brian of London back here, but I am not in London, so I am freer to talk than anybody who is in London. Who am I? I am obviously a former resident of Great Britain, once Great Britain, as I call it today, who moved to Israel about 9 or 10 years ago. And I used to do a lot of work when I was in the UK talking about Islam and the effect of Islamization on the UK and Europe. I did that under the name Brian of London, so I've kept the name because I built up quite a following back then. And the reason I'm telling you that is that soon after I got to Israel, I became aware through friends that I had back in the UK who were strongly looking at Islam. I became aware of Tommy Robinson and the EDL, and I looked into them in a very detailed way, studied them, looked at their forums, read the postings on their forums, became friendly with a lot of the people who frequented their forums, and I developed a very strong opinion on Tommy Robinson and the EDL, and it was a positive opinion because I could see that the EDL itself as a core organization was not racist, was definitely not racist. Tommy himself was not racist. And I came to know Tommy, and I came to know the other people who were instrumental in setting the EDL up. And the EDL was a very loose, the way it came to be and how it grew so quickly was an amazing story, is an amazing story. It's not really told. I haven't seen a good account of it, to be honest, yet. Nobody's written one. All of the negative reporting on the EDL misses the mark. And the best account of the period is in Tommy's own book, Enemy of the State, but that really only focuses on Tommy and what they did to Tommy. So I am also a friend of a guy who I met through those days, through the EDL days, Peter McLaughlin. Now that name might mean something to you because I only have a Kindle copy of this, and it might be inverted, I don't know. Easy Meat, it says, by Peter McLaughlin. This is the only book written about the Muslim, predominantly Muslim, in fact, almost all Muslim, rape gangs. This is gangs of men who take young children, befriend them. This is not like kidnapping, okay? This is befriending them. The way that this works, I covered in great detail in 2 YouTube chats with Peter McLaughlin, and you can find those on YouTube. Look for Easy Meat, Brian of London. You'll find them. And the whole crime of these rape gang things, what one comes to understand is how huge it was. What this book details in extraordinary depth, with references, citations, links to news sources, archived links to news sources, is that this had been going on for more than 40 years. 40 years, that's not a mistake, okay? 40 years. And the number of girls, what started to come to light 5 years after the EDL started, or 4 years, was reporting on this. But I remember back in 2010, I think it was, I was reading on the forums of the EDL the posts by parents looking for their daughters. Okay? That's all gone. That's down the memory hole. Those sites don't exist anymore. But people were talking about Muslim gang grooming, rape, jihad, lots of names for it. They were talking on these forums of the EDL about this a long time before I read anything in the press. So I knew about the problem. Peter's written the only book on it. The reason why his name is important is because he and Tommy Robinson have co-authored this book, Muhammad's Quran. This is the entire text of the Quran. There you go. Just text of the Quran. It's also about 100 and something page introduction as to why you should read this book and why this book matters. And the only thing that he's done with this Quran is he has reordered the Quran back into a chronological order of the Quran. And that's not new. In fact, 100 years ago, most of the Qurans you would have bought in the UK or the West in general would have been ordered probably in chronological order, starting from the earliest going to the last. And what this one does is it does it the other way around. It goes from the last back to the earliest. And that's because of the Islamic rules of abrogation, which means that earlier things are countermanded and replaced by later parts of the Quran. And that means that the later parts, the bits that were written down last, are more important than the bits at the beginning. Turns out the early part of the Quran is peaceful and nice and let's try and get along, and the latter part, which is when Muhammad developed into his complete warlord persona and started killing, raping, cutting off heads, taking the ex-wives of the people he just murdered as his wives. That part is more important. Peter McLaughlin has also written this book, and this book is co-authored with Tommy Robinson. And believe me when I say to you, Tommy Robinson knows everything that's in this book. That's for sure. And he had a good hand in writing it, because I also know the process that it went through to write the introduction and to get this book published. So we come on to what happened with Tommy on Friday. And in order to understand that, one needs to know this. And this is the court case from May 2017. This was really the first time Tommy got into trouble as a reporter for Rebel. And this was the case in Canterbury where he showed up outside the court to try and take pictures of defendants because he was incensed that there were people walking around the streets of Canterbury who were currently on trial for horrific crimes against children, and there you go, bye-bye, for horrific crimes against children, and nobody really knew that this was going on. Now, in the UK, just to give you some real background on the UK is very different to the US. There are, and these were for good reason, strong restrictions on what you can say about a trial while the trial is taking place. This is to do with not polluting the jury, not prejudicing the jury's opinion. The jury is supposed to pass judgment only on what they hear and see in court, what the prosecution lawyers present and what the defense presents, and what evidence the judge allows into his or her court. The jury is supposed to work only on those facts, not on something written in a newspaper, not on the opinion of an outside lawyer who probably doesn't know enough, or a journalist or anything. That's the basic structure of the British legal system around court reporting, and if you fall foul of that, you can be held in something called contempt of court. But there are specific laws in addition that you can't break. And the case that Tommy was convicted of was one of these specific cases. It might sound dumb, but I'm going to tell you exactly. He was convicted under Section 41 of the Criminal Justice Act of, wait for it, the year 1925. Bizarrely enough, in 1925, they added an offence to take a photograph in a court, because photography had not that long before been invented, and I guess by 1925 cameras had become small enough that they could be brought into a court and capture. So they had to add an offence saying that it was an offence to take a picture in a court. And then inside, and I'm looking here at the ruling of the judge, which is actually a pretty good ruling of law, but there's a discussion of where a comma sits and whether he was in the court, but he wasn't in the court, it's obvious, but he was maybe on the grounds of the court. Doesn't really matter. In specifics, the judge did not like the activity of Tommy trying to raise awareness of the trial while it was ongoing. And there are, certainly within the UK, there are reasons that it could have been. I'm not going to absolve Tommy of all responsibility for this, okay? But, and this is where it gets really, really, really interesting. Tommy did, if he did the crime, then what happened to him afterwards was totally out of all proportion to anything that's ever happened in the UK before, as far as I can see. And because what happened was he live streamed for even a minute. I think he took it down quite quickly. And in that live stream, he failed to mention that he branded the defendants as guilty, even though they hadn't been found guilty at that moment. Normally, when you're reporting on a court case that's ongoing, you have to make it clear that the defendants have pled not guilty and it's an alleged offence. This is the way people report on court cases in the UK. They also add at the end, the trial continues, meaning that you haven't presented all the information because perhaps you haven't presented the defence's case. So Tommy did this, but then what happened next was that he was raided at 4 a.m. by police, taken out of his bed at home, wife, kids, all there, and put in a prison cell. To the best of my knowledge, for making a mistake during a live broadcast, I don't think that's ever happened to another journalist. So they were already treating Tommy not as a journalist. They were treating him in a very, very different way. Also, and the judge acknowledges this in the ruling, Tommy was acting in accordance with how he had acted elsewhere and been told he was allowed to act. Because it says, I've got this thing marked up, you know, I've done some research on this. I have been told, however, and I accept, because I've seen video evidence of it, this is the judge, that you have previously been given different advice at a different court about what you could or could not do. So basically, and this is true of the UK, and I know this, and Tommy probably knows this too, a judge within a particular court has very high authority to basically punish anybody he doesn't like the look of or the behaviour of. And this is, you know, if you're making noise in a court case, if you're disturbing a court case, the judge can find you in contempt and actually can imprison you on the spot. This is possible. This is well known. So the judge acknowledges that Tommy wasn't really given a fair warning that in this case, the behaviour that had been okay outside somebody else's court, this judge was going to find reprehensible. He also acknowledged that as part of the background to the case, and it's very important to know this case in Canterbury that back in May last year is the same one that I think both Jada Franson and Paul Golding of Britain First, what are they called? Jada Franson, Paul Golding of Britain First, that's right. They fell foul of, but they really did commit some. They did some other things that Tommy is not accused of doing and didn't do. And the judge, again, in this ruling, he said, I am rightly reminded that everything else that has gone on in this trial, and he's referring to Jada and Paul, I'm reminded of everything else that has gone on in this trial by other groups or other individuals in similar attempts to get at, in quotes, the defendants is not something that I should take into account. The judge should not take into account the actions of others because there is no evidence at all to suggest that you, Tommy, were in any way involved in any of those other actions. And I do not hold you responsible for them. But it is part of the background and it is part of the reason why I had to take the avoiding action that I did take and why I had to move to take the action insofar as you were concerned of having been brought to this court. Now, I don't know if the judge ordered a 4 a.m. raid on Tommy's home for a journalistic error, but seems very, very strange to me. 4 a.m. raids are for drug dealers who might leave the country or violent criminals who you don't want to give them time to grab their gun. They are not for Tommy Robinson, who has shown no signs of violence for a long time. So that whole thing. Anyway, he was tried, he was convicted, he had good legal representation in this case, because this case was not decided in 4 hours. He had good legal representation to him, provided by the Übermensches at Rebel, and especially Ezra Levant, because he had backup. So there's legal arguments. The actual case was decided and then embargoed until the end of the trial of the Muslims, who were all found guilty and sentenced to long prison sentences for raping children in their chicken shop. So bring that forward now. What he was given as a result of this case was a 3-month suspended sentence. That means 3 months in prison, which again, for a journalist making a error that did not prejudice the trial, I think the judge is pretty clear that it didn't have the capacity at that moment to prejudice the trial. The trial was not damaged. There's no evidence that trial was damaged. The men are serving their prison sentences as far as I know. I don't know about appeals because court reporting in the UK seems to have died a complete death, possibly for these reasons. So for a first offence of making a mistake during a journalistic broadcast, he was given 3-month jail sentence. A journalist. He was acting as a journalist. Maybe an opinionated one, maybe a bad journalist, but a journalist. So that 3-month sentence that he was given, which was suspended for 18 months, which means that during 18 months, and again, the ruling of the judge is not particularly clear on this. Does it mean that if he was picked up for speeding, he would get the 3-month prison sentence? It's not clear. The judge did make, this is sort of pretty damning for Tommy, though. I'll read it in full because I'm trying to be 100% fair and accurate, and I've seen some total junk on the internet so far. I would have thought a further contempt of court by similar actions, then that sentence of 3 months would be activated, and that would be on top of anything else you were given by any other court. I think we can see where the 13 months has come from. In short, Mr. Yaxley Lennon turn up at another court, refer to people as Muslim paedophiles, Muslim rapists, and so on and so forth, while trials are ongoing, and before there has been a finding by a jury that is what they are, and you will find yourself inside. Do you understand? Thank you very much. Now, I watched pretty much all of that 1.25 hour live stream. Tommy was very careful about not referring to anybody as a Muslim paedophile or such. He kept saying alleged. He was really, really, really careful on that point of law. Okay? Now, the case he was outside of seems to be a complicated one in that it was a trial of multiple defendants, 29 or something, split into 3 sections. This is the bit that's probably hard to report in the UK. 3 sections. So one trial had already taken place. We don't know guilt or innocence of those defendants. The second trial had already taken place. The jury had given their verdict, but we don't know this. But again, that verdict is secret at the moment, and the sentencing is secret. Tommy was going there to try and sit in and hear the sentencing, or in fact, to hear the verdict. There's a third part to this trial that will happen sometime later in the year. All 3 of these trials are lumped together under one blanket ban of publication. So that means that a very, very, very large trial in a very large northern town that has a very large Muslim population is kept out of the papers. Now, the papers could publish something. I'm sure there are details. The names of the defendants, for example, were to be found on the court docket website, on the website that shows what cases are happening in Leeds Crown Court that day. I saw those names. I mean, Muhammad, Ahmed. I mean, it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not familiar with the people. But that information was clearly in the public domain, not even just in the public domain, not even just reported by newspapers. It was on the website of the court. So you could go on, while Tommy was standing outside, you could go onto the court's own website and see the names of all the defendants. So it can't be reading out the names of the defendants that matters. I believe the charges, I can't remember if the charges are there. I didn't even dig into this, but there is reporting that other press could do. But it turns out that the press in the UK do not like reporting on trials of Muslims accused of raping non-Muslim children, which is basically the entire, that's what easy meat is all about. In fact, the name easy meat, let me explain that to you. Easy meat is a phrase that a former UK government minister used in an interview when he was asked why do these men of, and he kept speaking about their national origin, which is a mistake. He kept talking about men of predominantly Pakistani or Bangladeshi background. That's a mistake. It's nothing to do with, it's not a race-based thing, it's an ideology-based thing. And he said, he was asked, why do you think they do it? It's not him to answer, but he said, because these men seem to regard non-Muslim children as easy meat, something they can prey on. The press in the UK for years avoided talking about this subject. They all knew it. And in fact, the first big reporter to report this in the Sunday Times, I believe it was, he expressed in an interview later regret, because he'd known that this was going on for a number of years prior to when he actually finally wrote a decent piece on it. And there were a few brave people who spoke up about it, but they were sidelined and subdued. Now, in the intervening period, this literally started 40 plus years ago. And again, the evidence is in this little devastating book called Easy Meat. You can find it on Amazon. The evidence of this going back so long is incontrovertible, and the evidence of it being covered up all over the place. Individual little local towns covering it up. The girl, basically, often what they would say is that the girls were responsible for their own rape. So at age 11 or 12, when these men would come and offer them free food, it would start with free drinks, chicken in the chicken shop, curry, that would suck them in. And then they would be offered drugs or alcohol. And when they were drunk or intoxicated, then it would be, we've done something for you. We've given you your meal. How about something for us? Topless picture. Touching. But very quickly it would become rape. And in some of these cases, in the Rotherham case, the girls that were testifying were saying they were raped by 30 men in a night. Now, if you look at the numbers of convictions, and Easy Meat's got a nice table of all of the convictions, and by the way, it's the table on Peter McLaughlin's website, which gives the names of everybody, and from the names you deduce whether they're Muslim or not, because that's not recorded, and that's where you get a statistic of 90% of those convicted of this particular class of child rape. This particular 90% of the convictions are from Muslim men. If it's 85% or 90%, it's somewhere there. And Quilliam, who did some research into this, hoping to find a different answer, Quilliam, Majid Nawaz's organisation, named after the naming of Quilliam is very bizarre for what it appears to be. Quilliam found exactly the same result. This is 85 to 90% committed by Muslims. And it's not even just Bangladeshis or Pakistanis, it's Somalis, which are, it goes across the entire, the only common feature that you can find is some kind of adherence to an Islamic ideology. And in Easy Meat, there is a whole chapter on basically the Islamic roots of this crime. And even more than that, when Peter first wrote the book, the first edition came out before ISIS and before Boko Haram. And what happened when we saw ISIS and Boko Haram take large areas and call them an Islamic state? Well, they started the same behaviours that we've been seeing in British towns for 40 years. And they started using exactly the same Quranic justifications that we'd heard come out of the mouths of some of the defendants once these trials suddenly got to court in Rotherham and elsewhere. So the whole case, the whole of this business, and it was a business, by the way, it went from beyond a just rape for the pleasure of rape of young children, if that is even possible. My head doesn't work that way. These men, some of them turned it into a business, and that was where the vast numbers of these rapes occurred. These girls were then prostituted and sold, taken around the country. That's why this occurred in places that didn't even have large Muslim populations, because these girls were brought in there and moved around the country. Again, all of this is on the BBC documentary and the BBC drama, Three Girls. You can see hints of this, but of course they don't ever draw out the common Islamic theme to it all. And that's what Tommy does. And that's what Tommy's trying to do. And so he went to the court to bring attention to a trial that the press were not covering. And maybe he fell foul of specific reporting restrictions placed on that trial. But we don't even know what the reporting restrictions are, because once they placed these reporting restrictions on trial, the press seemed not to report anything about the trial. So there's no website you can go to and say, what am I and what am I not allowed to say about a court case in Leeds that's going on this Friday? You can't find that information in the public record. Perhaps lawyers have access to a database that I don't and that Tommy doesn't, and perhaps Tommy should have had better, legal representation before he did what he did. But what he was doing on that morning and what was seen in that live stream should be within the bounds of legality. He didn't accuse any of the men of being guilty. He didn't say that they were guilty. He asked them questions, which he's allowed to do. He took their photograph on the way into court, which he's allowed to do. You've seen thousands of pictures of sometimes famous people being led into a court trying to cover up their heads, cover themselves against the press, because the press are allowed to take those pictures. Tommy, apparently, though, is not. What the court case a year ago in Canterbury, what this did, it established a whole little legal framework that is different from the framework that anybody else in the UK operates under, which applies only to one man called Tommy Robinson, or Stephen Yaxley Lennon. He basically, instead of one rule for all, there is one rule for all, and then there is the Tommy Robinson law. And he appears to have been jailed in the space of 5 hours without proper legal representation under the Tommy Robinson exemptions to the usual UK laws. That's my informed opinion, acting from as far away as I am. I'll say one other thing about the process that led to him being put in prison for over a year in the space of 5 hours. He was taken off the streets. Conflicting information was given to the people around him. So he'll be released, he'll be charged, and then normally you're arrested. You're charged with a crime. The police interrogate you, get as much information as they can out of you, but you're supposed to have a solicitor present. And then you're released, maybe on bail, or maybe you're remanded, you're put in prison, and you're given a court date. And for that court, you prepare. You get a lawyer. You review the facts of the case with your lawyer, and then you get information from the prosecution of what information they're going to present. And you present a defense, and you have a court case. All of this seemed to happen yesterday because it's contempt of court. This can be done. I understand how it can be done, because contempt of court is a very draconian way of doing this. Because it was contempt of court, they just said, no, we're not going to let you bring a lawyer who's actually, who knows anything about this other case, okay? We're not going to let you bring a lawyer who knows your history. We're going to give you a lawyer who knows nothing about you. He's probably a guy who just deals with drug dealers and fights outside bars and the usual stuff. Not a technical case that involves a previous ruling from a year ago and a suspended sentence. We're not going to let you bring a lawyer who is well-versed in your case. We're not going to give you time to brief a lawyer. We're not going to let you pull up documents like this. We're not going to give you any of the things that would normally go towards a reasonable carriage of justice. We're not going to give you a jury, because this is just going to be in front of the same judge who has already shown he doesn't like you because he doesn't like what you're doing for his other case. We're going to put you in front of that judge on your own. So forget the lawyer. He's useless because he will not have had time to prepare. And we're going to hand you down an enormous sentence of... So what they've done is they've probably given him a 10-month sentence for what he did on Friday, added to the 3-month sentence he got a year ago. And that's where the number 13, unlucky for some, Friday the 13th, comes in. So I've spoken a long time. This is probably the longest Periscope I've ever done. In short, Tommy was tried and convicted in conditions that probably don't apply to anybody else in the entirety of the UK. This is because the UK courts, police, the local council in Leeds, the government, the national government, and probably all the way up to Theresa May, who, let us not forget, when she was Home Secretary, banned Pamela Geller and Robert Spencer from coming to the UK. And in fact, I was reminded of this because I read Pamela's book recently, which is excellent. The invitation for Pamela and Robert to come to the UK was given by, guess who? Yeah, Tommy Robinson. They were invited to an EDL event. And it was that EDL event that Theresa May issued the ruling that kept Pamela and Robert out of the country. So you're seeing how this gets together. Theresa May, Theresa May is probably aware of what happened. But I'm going to tell you now the hopeful bit. The hopeful bit is, one, America has gone nuts for this case. So thank you to all the Americans who have been sharing this stuff and talking about it. Fox News have published an article on their website. And Fox News' website is not the big deal. Is not alone the big deal. But what it means is that Fox News hosts, hello Tucker, hello Sean Hannity, hello the others, they can all talk about this. Will we see Katie Hopkins on Tucker Carlson next week discussing Tommy Robinson's case? I damn well hope so. Does that put pressure on the UK authorities? Abso-effing-lutely it does. Does it mean that Tommy will be safe in prison? I hope it means he will be safer because, you know, Trump has been flying around the world rescuing Americans from imprisonment by evil regimes. If we can get Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity talking about this, that's basically Trump's security briefing, I'm told. So can we get this in front of Trump? I think we can. And I'll tell you, you know, I know a lot more about Tommy than most. Tommy was in Israel on the day that Trump was elected. We went to bed. Tommy arrived the day of the election on November the 8th, 2016. Tommy arrived in Israel. We drove around the country. We drove up to the north and we were staying in a hotel on the shores of Lake Galilee, where Jesus once walked. We were staying in this hotel. And we went to bed at night not knowing the result of the election. We woke up, and we woke up before the election, before the result came out. So we were all like going to breakfast, watching a screen, back in a room, watching a screen. Eventually we left the hotel. We still didn't know who'd won because we went to our first stop, which was to look at an ancient fishing boat that's 2,000 years old, that's from the time of Jesus. We looked at the shipping boat, and we're you know, I'm watching my phone all the time. Suddenly, finally, no Clinton acceptance, no Clinton speech saying she, you know, because she went to bed, apparently. But Trump did his speech, and we all watched that on my phone in this amazing, amazing thing to be with. So Trump, we were there. And so my connection goes back a long time with Tommy. I consider him a friend, a very, very close friend. I was absolutely devastated on Friday because the idea that he goes back to prison, I was one of the first to read Enemy of the State. I read a proof before it was published. And even though I knew most of the individual stories in there, the book, Enemy of the State, if you take the time to read that, if you take the time to understand who Tommy Robinson is from that book, and every single story in there I had been told that I had been told before, the details in the book match every time I've heard Tommy tell it. It's like everything lines up. The stuff about how he was treated in prison was just totally shocking to me. You can watch your prison dramas all you like and your Shawshank Redemptions and see how bad prisons are. But nothing prepares you for it when it's a guy you know who's written in a book and then tells you face to face, this is what happened to me, this is how they tried to kill me, this is how they tried to kill me again. The only thing I'm hopeful for now is that the attention this is getting in America and the rest of the world, Australia, all of you lovely people, Europe, everybody sharing this, that means that the British government is under extreme pressure to keep him safe in prison. That's what I hope. And you know what? If their goal was to get people not to talk about Muslim rape gangs and 40 years of victims, 100,000 victims, is it 1 million victims? If you read Easy Meat, you start to see how the numbers could be enormous. An entire multiple generations. It's generational, actually. There are examples of mothers and daughters who have been through this entire grooming. I hate that word because it's just too this is jihad rape system. If that was their goal, was to silence that and to make people talk about it less, don't think that's going to happen. And it may well be, I've got to get back to the cover of this book, but it may well be that Easy Meat, if this means that Easy Meat has another edition, a third edition, and I know, you know, it could well be that that third edition could come out quite soon because there's lots to be updated. Telford happened after the last edition was published. That book could be a massive hit, a massive seller, and it could open a lot of people's eyes, especially in America, where, do we think this is happening? We don't know. Is the press searching for it? Doubt it. Not in their interests. Anyway, I'm Brian of London. I live in Israel. I'm an ardent Zionist, obviously, because I moved my family to Israel because I didn't like the Islamic future of Britain. But that doesn't mean I want to see Britain fall. I really don't. I will do almost anything to stop it. And that's why I work with people like Tommy and with others in the UK who are doing their best to try and save Britain and Europe from dimitude. All this is dimitude. You can't understand what's going on in Europe unless you read the work of Bat Yaor. Read Islam and Dimitude. Read Eurabia. Read any of her books, to be honest. But once you understand the mindset of Dimitude, which is submission to Islam, that's what they're looking for. They want you to submit. And the UK government has submitted. The reason they don't want you talking about Muslim rape gang trials is because it makes them look bad, and they want you to submit. There's also infiltration, massive infiltration. It is without a shadow of a doubt that there are senior policemen, senior council members, senior child protection services, senior politicians, and people all throughout the entire system that should have protected those children who are Muslim. There are almost certainly members of those groups who took part in these crimes. Think about that. There are Muslim men working in councils and police forces who will have taken part in these crimes. And they don't want you reporting on this, and they don't want you knowing about it, and they don't want anybody knowing about it. And that's why Tommy's in prison now, and he's doing this for all of you. He's doing this because nobody else will, because Daily Mail's not doing this. Nobody's challenging these reporting restrictions. Why are there reporting restrictions that are different from other trials? Why is this particular crime not reported with the severity that it should be? All right. I'm talked out here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Share it around. I'll put it on YouTube later. Bye-bye.